Economics, Business, Finance and Government 2021, which has received generous support from many partners, especially from University of Bandar Lampung, from Harvard Business School, US, and from University of Craiova, Romania, which has taken us months of intensive in preparation. I extend to you all my warmest welcome by this Zoom meeting link because we are still in pandemic COVID-19 situation. Business Strategic and Sustainability Post-COVID-19 Pandemic is our conference theme today. We expect critically challenge ahead in fully realizing the spirit of the theme for more specific and detailed focus. We have arranged the series of the international conference every year, and today is the fourth. We held at the University of Bandar Lampung, Indonesia, collaboration with Harvard Business School, US, and from University of Craiova, Romania. My appreciation also to members of the organizing committee and staff that have been working very hard to make this conference held. I'd like to thank them for their dedication, time, and efforts. I wish also to thank to our patrons, individual, organization partners, students, especially graduate students at university, and also volunteers. Without their generosity and fully participation, we will not be able to create a total environment to help this international conference. Thank you all for your presence and participation, and you are very important part of this conference to be successful. Finally, by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I officially open the fourth International Conference of Economics, Business, Finance and Governance, or ICEBFG 2021. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Dr. Andala Ramaputra Barusman, SAMIJ, for the opening speech. For the next discussion will be continued by Dr. Susanto as our moderator. To Dr. Susanto Saman, SSM, whom MA PhD, the time is yours.
Yeah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable our keynote speakers, distinguished guests, fellow students, and all participants, ladies and gentlemen, very warm greeting from us here at the University of Bandar Lampung in Indonesia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to this prestigious international conference. It is the fourth International Conference on Economic, Business, Finance, and Governance. The conference, as informed before, is hosted by the Graduate School, University of Bandar Lampung, Indonesia. The theme of our conference is Business Strategic and Sustainability Post-COVID-19 Pandemic. Thank you very much, the Director of Graduate School Program of University of Bandar Lampung, Associate Professor Dr. Andala Ramaputra Barusman, for the opening speech. He's also the head of Higher Education Organizer Alliance in Lampung Province. All right, in this occasion, we shall have a standing presentation or lectures from our prominent keynote speakers in our conference, whom I believe shall enrich our insights and knowledge on the conference theme. Our keynote speakers are Professor Julie Batilana and Professor Adriana Burlasio-Puyu. Now, allow me to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Julie Batilana from Harvard University, USA. Julie Batilana is the Joseph C. Wilson Professor of Business Administration in the Organizational Behavior Unit at Harvard Business School, and also the Ellen L. Gletzman Professor of Social Innovation at Harvard Kennedy School, where she also the founder and faculty chair of the Social Innovation and Change Initiative. Professor Julie currently is teaching the second-year Power and Influence course, and previously taught the first-year Leadership and Organizational Behavior course in the MBA program. She also teaches in the doctoral program and in executive education offering at the university. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Professor Julie Bertilana from Harvard University, USA. Professor Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this warm welcome. And I'm delighted to join you all today. I should say good afternoon, good evening, good morning to some of you. I know we're all joining from different places in the world, but we are all united by the same core interest we have in the importance of operating the shift from business as usual to sustainable business. So let me share my screen with you so that you can hopefully get to see my slides. Can you see them now?
Yes.
Yep, wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is great news. And I'm going to make sure that I now get to also see you all and see your comments in case you're chatting and anything that you want to share with me. Okay, so let me tell you a bit more about what I'm going to talk to you about today. A lot of the challenges that we're facing at the moment are global challenges, from dealing with the pandemic, as we were all just discussing, to protecting and saving our planet, reducing social and economic inequalities, fighting forms of racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination, right? And if we think about all of these challenges that are global ones, certainly what they require of us is that we change our social and economic system to try and create a society that's going to be greener, fairer, and more democratic. Now, the challenge is how can we make that happen? And that will for sure require that we change our organizations, we change our companies, because these organizations, these companies have been part of the system that has created all the issues that we're facing now. But these organizations, these companies could now become part of the solutions that we rely on to address the many challenges that we are facing at the moment. Now, if we want to rise up to these challenges, the truth is that we're going to have to implement many changes in organizations and in society. And so this is going to require of us that we fully understand power. And what I want to talk to you about today is power. It happens that I just published a book entitled Power for All, How It Really Works and Why It's Everyone's Business. And I want to tell you more, not only about the book, but I want to tell you more about why I wrote that book and how it connects to this theme that's bringing us together today that relates to helping businesses operate the transition to sustainability. So, what is power? And why am I saying that it is so critical to rise up to the challenges that we're facing and to help us operate the shift to sustainability? Power is the ability of an individual or a group of individuals to influence other people's behavior. So if you think about all the challenges that we're facing and all the changes that we need to implement, if we want to be successful in implementing these changes, it is pretty obvious that then we need power. We need the ability to influence other people's behavior so that we can all together create a new normal that is hopefully going to be more democratic, fairer, and greener within our organizations and in society. Now, this is the definition of power, but what I like to say is that a definition is not an explanation. The real question becomes, fine, power is the ability to influence others, but what is power made of? Where does it come from? I've asked this question to many people, well, from all walks of life. I've had the privilege to work with the students, not only in the classroom at Harvard University, where I'm fortunate to teach, but I've had the opportunity to teach students across the world and to work with people across sectors, across the world. Some of them highly educated, some of them who never had the opportunity to get an education, but were having this incredible impact within their communities. So again, people from all walks of life. So I've asked them this question. And what I've come to realize over time is that in spite of all the differences across all these people, there was a common theme. And the common theme was that we human beings tend to hold deep misconceptions in mind about what power is. And there are three main misconceptions that I've identified that I want to share with you. The first misconception is this idea that somehow power is a possession. So people would come to me and ask me the following question: Julie, what's the list of personality traits that make some people powerful? Because it looks like they have those traits and those traits must make them powerful all the time. The second misconception that people have in mind is this idea that power is only for the people at the top. It's only for the CEOs. It's only for the top executives. It's only for the prime ministers, for the presidents. And then the third misconception that people have in mind about power is this idea that power is dirty. And so think about all three misconceptions put together. So many people come to me and tell me, you know what, Julie, I don't think I have those personal characteristics. And by the way, I'm not one of the people at the top, but good for me, because at least I'm not getting my hands dirty. Now, here is the issue with these misconceptions. What I've come to worry a lot about them, because they have truly detrimental consequences for us individually and collectively. Individually, these misconceptions are a source of frustration, because when people do not understand power for what it is, they cannot have the impact they aspire to. I work with so many change makers who are trying to help their companies transition to sustainability, but when they don't understand power, they cannot have the impact they want to have within their companies. Now, collectively, these misunderstandings of power are even more catastrophic, are even more worrisome. Because if we do not understand power, then we will not be able to identify, to prevent, or to stop power abuses when they emerge. And these power abuses can emerge within our companies. They can emerge at the societal, national level as well. And the issue is that these abuses of power can really threaten our freedoms and well-being. And in fact, this is the 15th year in a row that democracy has been declining across the world. This is why I'm saying that these misunderstandings, these misconceptions about power are truly worrisome. Now, that being said, there is good news. And the good news is that what I've seen in my research, what I've seen through my teaching and through my advising, is that when people understand power dynamics, they become much more effective leaders and change makers. And power dynamics can be learned. Again, I've seen that in my research. I've seen that in my teaching. And this is what motivated my co-author, Tiziana Cacciaro, and myself to write this book, Power for All. Machiavelli, the Italian political philosopher, wrote his well-known essay about power the prince for a prince in the 15th century. We wrote this book, Power for All, for everyone. Right? Not only those who are already in power, not only those who want to emulate them, but for everyone, including those who've been excluded from power for quite some time. So now, let me get back to that critical question as what I was asking you. What is power made of? Where does power come from? Well, what we explain in the book is that when you distill power down to its fundamentals, then you get to understand the following. You get to understand that power resides in control over access to valued resources. Bear with me. This is critical to our understanding of power and our effectiveness as change makers in organizations and in society. So power resides in control over access to valued resources. What does that mean? It means that you have power over me if you control access to resources that I need and want, that I value. And that I have power over you if I control access to resources that you need and want, that you value. Let's take an example. It could be that you happen to have access to someone who is an expert in the field where I'm conducting a project at the moment, and that I absolutely need to connect with this person. So if you're one of the very few people I know who's connected to that person, you have some power over me. Now, in the meantime, it could be that I control access to a budget that you need to be able to complete the project that you are working on. And if so, I also have some power over you. So now, what is it that you can understand once you understand the fundamentals of power? What you can understand is that, in fact, power is never a possession. You may have a lot of power over me today, but you may not have a lot of power over me tomorrow. And it could be that I don't have much power over you today, but that may actually change tomorrow. And what I'd like to do is illustrate that point with a story. I'd like you to meet Nezuma Mjube. In the process of writing this book, Power for All, Tiziana Cachario, my co-author, and myself interviewed more than 100 people across the world. And we picked these people because they had very diverse, different, distinct paths to and through power. And we used their stories to give life to everything we've learned through research in social sciences about power dynamics. So Nezuma is one of the people we met with. Nezuma lives in Tanzania in a remote rural village. And the first time I met Nezuma, she told me about the dream she had when she was growing up in her rural community in Tanzania. So she explained to me that she wanted to become a teacher, but she never had the opportunity to go to school. She had to marry at a young age. And as she told me about her situation, she herself said that she never felt powerful, that she felt quite powerless. And in fact, she was quite objective when she said to me, listen, we don't have a single woman represented on the village council. At least it was the case up until 2016. And so she said, you know, I am one of these women, and in my community for the longest time, I really didn't have much power. Now, things radically changed for Nezuma though in 2016. She went from feeling and really objectively being quite powerless to becoming one of the most powerful members of her community. And in fact, she became so powerful that she was invited to have a seat on the powerful village council and became the first woman to serve on that village council. Now, how did that happen? It happened because in 2016, Nezuma encountered the not-for-profit international organization Barefoot College. Barefoot College has developed a truly innovative pedagogy that enables them to train illiterate women to become solar engineers through learning by doing over a period of 5 months. Nezuma volunteered to become part of this program. And after 5 months, she came back to her community. She electrified the community. So she was now in control of one of the most valuable resources for our community, electricity. She didn't only literally bring power to the community, she also became one of the most powerful members of the community herself. So Nezuma's story is a great illustration of the fundamentals of power. Remember, it's about controlling access to valued resources. And her story is also now enabling us to debunk the first myth about power. People tend to believe that power is a possession. You have it or you don't. No, what we understood through Nezuma's story is that power is relative. She didn't have power in that community at all. She became one of the most powerful people in that community when she controlled access to one of the most valued resources, electricity. Now, I don't want us to stop here. What I also want us to do now is debunk the second fallacy about power, this idea that power is only for the people at the top. I want to debunk it because it is such a widespread fallacy and it is preventing so many change makers to have the kind of impact they want to have in their corporations as they're trying to operate the transition to sustainability. Let me share with you another story about that to try and help us really understand why we have to be careful and why it's important that we do not assume that power is only for the people at the top. As you probably hear to my accent, although I'm talking to you from Boston today, I am not a pure Bostonian. I happen to be a hybrid French-American Bostonian. And I'm going to take you to France here with this story. I want to tell you about a group of French researchers who in the 1960s decided to study the productivity of workers on the floor of factories. And they want to study at that time a cigarette factory called the CETA. And so they wanted to understand the factors influencing the productivity of workers. And their first step was to go and meet with the leadership of this organization. So they met with the leaders and they asked the leaders to give them the organizational chart. So they got the organizational chart And then they went to observe what was happening on the floor of the factory. After 2 days, though, here is what happened. The researchers asked to meet again with the leadership of the organization. They met, and here is what the researchers said. There was probably some kind of a mistake. We think you gave us the wrong organizational chart. As you can imagine, the leaders were quite annoyed and explained that they didn't have multiple organizational charts and that they knew they gave them the right organizational chart. But why is it that they thought that maybe they got the wrong one? Well, here is what the organizational chart showed. It showed that the workers were reporting to foremen, who were reporting to middle managers, who were reporting to top managers. Yet, what the researchers noticed is that when top managers, middle managers, foremen came on the floor and asked workers to do something, the workers didn't seem to care that much. Yet, when maintenance workers in charge of fixing machines came and asked the workers to do something, the workers were quite frustrated, but they immediately complied. The puzzle, though, for the researchers was that these maintenance workers were as low in the hierarchy as the workers. So the most powerful people in this organization were the people who were the lowest in the hierarchy, the maintenance workers. Where did their power come from? Well, they controlled access to the most valued resource in the organization, which was working machines. And the machines had a bad tendency to break, and they were the only ones who knew how to fix the machines. And they were careful not to share this information with anyone. Their approach was certainly not the kind of approach you would want to have in the company, but that's what they did to try and maintain their power. So now, what are we taking away from the CESTA story? Well, you have to be aware of using the organizational chart to identify who has power and who doesn't. Sometimes the people at the top have a great deal of power, but sometimes they don't. That's because authority and power are not the same. Authority is the formal right to give orders and commands. And in some situations, it can give you power. It can enable you to influence others. But in other situations, it doesn't give you much power. You cannot imagine the number of CEOs, top executives, who come to my office, close the door, and tell me I feel quite powerless because I cannot influence the behavior of the people in my company. I cannot operate the changes I think we should operate. And conversely, what is absolutely critical to keep in mind is that you do not need authority to have power. In fact, Tiziana and I have conducted research about change makers across industries. And the question we asked was, who are the most effective change makers? And what we found was that the most effective change makers tend to be the people who are central in the network of their organization or in the network of the sector of society they want to change. These central people are the people to whom others go for advice. These people are more effective change makers than others. They have more power. Why? Because trust is a huge conduit of influence. So as you think about your sustainability project and changes, you have to be able to identify these central players you can work with because they are the people others trust. And if they become the ambassadors of the change will happen and it will happen more quickly. Now, how can you identify who has power and who doesn't in an organization? If you want to conduct this kind of power mapping, you need to ask yourself 2 questions and 2 questions only. What do people need and want? What do they value? And who controls access to what people need and want? Do not use the organizational chart. That's going to be misleading and confusing. Ask yourself these 2 questions, answer these 2 questions, and then you'll get to understand who has power and who doesn't. Now, last but not least, now that we know that power is not only for the people at the top, but that it is potentially for all, we need to debunk the 3rd fallacy so that you can engage cleanly with power and you can help the people on your teams to debunk the fallacies and engage cleanly with power. Power is not dirty. Power is energy. It is the energy you need to get anything done. You will never be able to help your company's transition to sustainability, to help society transition to sustainability, if you do not have the energy, the power to make the change happen. Now, let's not be naive though. I know that power can be dirty. We all know that from our experiences, from history, and from research in the lab in social psychology. But that power can be dirty doesn't mean that it has to be. Let me tell you more about that. Here is what we explain in the book. What we know is that indeed power can have two truly insidious effects on human psychology. Power can poison us. How? Here is what we know. We know that when we are in positions of power for some time, we tend to become more confident. We tend to start thinking that we deserve to be where we are. In other terms, we become more hubristic. That's the first insidious effect. The second insidious effect of power on human psychology is that power tends to make us less sensitive to others. When we are in positions of power for some time, we start thinking that we deserve to be there and that it's all about us. We're less able to put ourselves in the shoes of others. Now, those are the two poisons of power: hubris and self-centeredness, self-focus. The good news is that we know from research, from our experience, from history, that there are antidotes to these power poisons. What are the antidotes? Well, the antidote to hubris is humility. That goes together with an awareness of our impermanence. And the antidote to self-focus is empathy. That goes together with an awareness of our interdependencies that the pandemic has made so clear and salient to us. So now what do we need to do? We need to cultivate humility and we need to cultivate empathy to counter the poisons of power, hubris and self-focus. And when we do so, when we cultivate humility and empathy, that's when we're able to embrace a higher purpose, to see power as a responsibility, and to adopt a truly collective orientation. So this is something we're all responsible for doing, but this is not enough. And let me share another story so that you can understand why I say it's not enough. I want to tell you about Vera Cordero. Vera Cordero is one of the most inspiring social change makers I've had the opportunity to work with. She lives in Brazil. She's a pediatrician. She's a social entrepreneur. She created Instituto Dara. Her mission has always been and continues to be to help the kids in the poorest communities in Brazil and across the world who cannot afford access to medication that would save their lives. In wanting to help these kids, Vera got to understand that what she had to do was not only concentrate on their health, but try and have a multidimensional approach to solve the poverty challenges that their families have to deal with. So what is Instituto Dara doing? Instituto Dara is working with the parents of sick kids in the poorest communities and helping them deal with employment issues, housing issues, education issues, nutritional issues, right, and so on. And that kind of holistic approach to solving poverty and healthcare issues for the sickest kids in the poorest communities, that approach has had an amazing impact, right? She's helped more than 75,000 people get out of extreme poverty in Brazil, and she's already indirectly affected the life of 1 million people across the world. So you'd be thinking, if one person is not supposed to abuse their power, it has to be Vera. She's all about others. She's all about humility and empathy. Yet, when I met with Vera and we talked about power, she was very candid and she courageously told me that at some point in her career, she actually got to be intoxicated by power. At that time, she had become more well-known. Instituto Dara had become more well-known. She was getting a lot of awards, international awards. She had become a frequent speaker at conferences like the World Economic Forum. And that's when her employees confronted her. They told her that she was not able to listen anymore, that she interrupted them. That's also when her family confronted her. They asked her why she seemed so excited to go to all those award ceremonies and why she was not paying enough attention to her family and to the other families she was trying to help. That was a big moment for Vera. She realized that even though she had tried to cultivate humility and empathy, she had still been intoxicated by power. So what did she do? She doubled down on humility and empathy. For her, it was about meditation. For other people, it's other things, but it's about, again, the cultivation of humility and empathy. But she didn't stop there. She created processes and systems within our organization to do two things: to really share her power with others and to make sure that she, as a powerful person, would be held accountable for what she was doing and for how she was using her power. Let me give you an example. One thing she decided to do was that in meetings, in the really important weekly meetings, she would just shut up and listen to everyone. And only after having listened to everyone would she be allowed to talk and share her perspective. So that's the kind of new process, the kind of new structure that enables you to share power and to be held accountable. So what do we need to do? We need to cultivate humility and empathy, and we also need to welcome and actually accept the checks on our power when we are in a position of power, because no one is immune to the risk of abusing power. Now, where are we? We've been able to debunk the fallacies now that we understand that power is about control over access to valued resources. We have also been able to talk about the tools we have to map power, to understand who has power and who doesn't. It's about answering the two questions. Remember, what do people value? Who controls access to what they value? And you need to understand that, and you need to help others understand that. Otherwise, you will fail in implementing changes in your organization. We do know that this power mapping is the skill that is the most important skill as a source of power. And then now that we've understood the fundamentals of power, we can also identify strategies that you can use to rebalance power. You need to understand what others value, and you need to figure out how you can access the resources that they value. Those are going to be your sources of power. Now, in conclusion, here is what I'd like to tell you. You may not have access to all the sources of power that you need to have the impact that you aspire to in your organization, in your company, and more broadly in society. But by joining forces with others, you can significantly expand the pool of resources that you have access to. And this is the power of collective action, both in organizations and in society. Together, we can create a fairer, a more democratic, and a greener society. And that's why I'm so excited to join this community of people today. I know that all of you are committed to operating the shift to sustainability. So we are part of the same global movement. The reality, let's not lie to each other, is that we continue to be faced with massive power imbalances, and we also continue to be faced with a clear, acute environmental crisis. But what we've learned from history is that what we human beings created, we can change if we work together as part of those collective movements. Now, what we need to understand, though, is that it's not enough to agitate. It's not enough to highlight the problems to be able to operate the shift to sustainability. We also need to innovate and to orchestrate, as we explain in the book. Now, for any movement for change to actually succeed, you need agitation, innovation, and orchestration. And I'd like you to think about what role you can play. The agitators are those who speak out against the status quo and raise public awareness of the problem. The innovators are the ones who develop actionable solutions to address the grievances identified by the agitators. And orchestrators are the ones who enable coordination for all the parties involved to put in place the changes that allow the solution and vision by the innovators to be adopted, but to be adopted at scale. Now, you may not be able to play all of those roles as part of the movement for sustainability, but you need to think about the sources of power you have and what role you're going to play. Are you an agitator, an innovator, an orchestrator? Think about it and work with others to have more impact. So here we go. I hope now you understand why we entitled that book Power for All. I would say that power can and actually must be for all. Why? Because everybody can grasp the inner workings of power. It takes for people to just understand the fundamentals of power. I told you about power is about control over access to valued resources. Power can and must be for all because everybody can gain a measure of power. You can do that once you understand the fundamentals of power. And then importantly, we must all understand, build, and use our power individually and collectively as citizens if we want to make sure that we're not going to let a few people, one individual, just a handful of them, to concentrate too much power in their hands and then threaten our freedoms and our well-being. Thank you so much for your attention. As I said, this is all out of that book. If you want more information about it, you can go check the website of the book and you'll find all the resources and more information about the great people like Vera Cordero and Nezuma and Jube I told you about today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Julie. We get insightful lecture on what power is, what power poisons and antidotes are, how important to map power, and many other things related to power. Your lecture makes us rethink the basic assumption about influence and about power. One statement in your lecture, very nice. We actually do not need authority to have power. Okay, participants, you may write your questions in the chat. Meanwhile, I have two questions from the participant, Professor Julie. Questions one, how can we manage power effectively and efficiently to be more productive? Because for most people, power dynamic is frustrating, is bad, or many bad things associated with power. And the second questions, how actually we force the government to use the power to make the life of citizens better, because for some people, the government may not use its power for the best benefit of the people. Yes, please, Prof. Julie.
Yeah, so thank you for those two really important questions. So the first about, how do you engage effectively with power, and the frustration you're mentioning, and then this idea that power is dirty was a key motivation for writing the book. I hope that what I helped you understand with the presentation today is that power itself is not dirty. The dirtiness, if anywhere, is in ourselves. But as I mentioned, there are things we can all do to use the power that we have well. And I talked about cultivating empathy, cultivating humility, and creating the checks on power and making sure that we share our power within our organizations and more broadly in society. So what can I tell you if you're dealing with that frustration and if you're uneasy with power? That it is absolutely critical that you debunk these assumptions that you have. Again, power is not dirty. It's not only for the people at the top. It's not a possession. It's not only for the people who already have it. It is potentially for everyone. And all you need to do is understand the fundamentals of power. Again, what do people value and who controls access to what they value? Once you understand that, once you're able to read the political landscape to know who has power and who doesn't, then you're equipped to be a more effective change maker. You're equipped to engage with power more effectively. But this is not going to happen if you do not make this exercise, if you do not systematically try to understand power. I'm thinking about the fundamentals of power as infrared glasses. My hope is that after you read the book, after you engage with these ideas, you'll just have to put on the infrared glasses and you'll be able to see and understand things that you couldn't see and understand. And that's going to enable you to get rid of the frustration and finally understand this working environment around you so that you can better influence it. Now, the question on the government is a critical question. We have a number of examples in the book of remarkable people and movements that actually have worked together to push governments to better take into account the public interest and the interest of the citizens in general. Now, you're right, this is a critical issue. How do you deal with a situation in which a government is actually not doing what's best for the citizens? How do you deal with a situation in any country across the world where you may have a few people who actually make decisions that are not about the citizens, but more about their own self-advancement? Well, this is where our collective civic vigilance as citizens is so critical. We have to make sure that these things do not happen. And when they happen, we have to have the courage to get together, to form collective movements, to put pressure on those in governments so that they end up changing things. In the book, we give the example of Tope in Nigeria, who was able to oppose a bill by the government that would have significantly reduced the rights of citizens online. How was she able to do that? Initially, she thought she could mobilize everyone just on the internet, in the virtual world, through social media. But then she got to understand that although it was a first step, that was not enough. So she understood that she also, in fact, had to mobilize people in the real world and get everyone on the street in front of the Senate to put pressure on the government, on the senators, so that they would give up on that bill and preserve the rights of the citizens. And they succeeded, but it took a lot of work, it took a lot of organizing. It took not only agitation, but also innovation and orchestration to bring everyone together.
Yes, okay. Professor Julie, we have more questions. It is from Idris Asmuni. In your presentation, may I note the points that having control access over others and knowing people value are the key words for someone to have the power within the organization. The question is, in what way the power has important role to influence business strategy? Another question from Dinda Arabella Putri. The question, their conclusion rooted in research and worldwide reporting showed that power can be dirty, but in honorable hands can also be an enormous force for good. The questions, what do you mean about this? Could you give details in to explain that statement? And one more questions, Luke from Luke Suchiyawati. Could you give example about the business with the power of all your target? Okay.
Okay, so let me start with the first question. In what way does power have an important role in influencing business strategy? This is absolutely critical. Like, you know, the reality is that if you want to influence the business strategy, you need the power to do so. What is power? It's the ability to influence others. So without power, you will not be able to influence others. My research is about social enterprises and corporations that pursue the triple bottom line. They pursue social, environmental, and financial objectives. Now, what I've seen in working with these corporations and working with the change makers who implement these changes is that if they want to succeed, the people who are trying to push for the changes need power. And when they fail, most of the time, it's not because of a lack of good ideas or, you know, processes, systems, like they know what is supposed to be done, but they do not have the power to make that happen. And so this is why you need to understand the fundamentals of power, and then you need to identify the sources of power you have so that you can build the power you need to succeed in implementing change. Now, what are the sources of power we all have at our disposal to try and make change happen? We actually have three main sources of power at our disposal. We have personal sources of power that are based on our individual attributes and skills. Those can be sources of power in certain situations, like your expertise, your charisma, the level of effort you put into something. We also have positional sources of power at our disposal that are based on the formal roles that we have in an organization or in a society. For example, our position in the hierarchy. Yes, that can be in some situations a source of power, but remember, it is never a guarantee of power, and you do not need to be at the top to be able to have impact, as I already explained. And you also have relational sources of power at your disposal. And too often, we don't pay enough attention to these relational sources of power that are based on our network of relationships. As I told you, what Adriana and I have seen in our research is that the most effective change makers are the central players in the network, the people to whom others go for advice. So if you want to build the power to influence the business strategies, you have to be able to think, are you one of these central players? If you're not, can you partner with other people who genuinely believe in the changes you're working on and who happen to be central in the network so that they can help you accelerate the implementation of the change? Now, the second question that was asked is about, indeed, like power can be dirty, but in honorable hands, it can also be an enormous force for good. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is what I was sharing earlier in the presentation. Power can be dirty. Let's not be naive. I told you about how it can intoxicate us, make us more hubristic on the one hand, and also in addition to that, make us more self-centered, which becomes a real problem. But indeed, when people have humility, when they have empathy, when they welcome the checks on their power, when they accept them, then power is in honorable hands, and then it can have a great deal of impact. Think about some of the most well-known social change makers, right, globally. Think about Mandela, think about Martin Luther King. More recently, think about Greta Thunberg, Malala Yousafzai. Like, these change makers are people who've been standing for moral values, for important changes, and they have inspired others to follow them. So when power is in honorable hands, power can be used to change existing situations, to fight unjust power hierarchies, and help us create a society that's greener, that's fairer, and that's more democratic. And then finally, the question was, can you give an example about a business-related example about the power, of all? Yes, I can. So I was just telling you about the companies that pursue a triple bottom line. And I have so many examples of people I worked with who didn't feel they have the power that was needed to make the change happen within their corporations. And then we sat down, I explained the fundamentals of power to them. I gave them the infrared glasses that enable them to see who really has power and who doesn't. And then after that, they were able to finally understand who they had to engage, who they should be working with, so that the change could become a reality. Right. So within corporations, absolutely. Let me also give you another example of power for all. It's an example we mentioned in the book. It's the example of Helen Ochoa. Helen Ochoa was the first American Latina woman to go to space. And she was an astronaut. And she later became in her life the head of the Johnson Space Center, which is the center that trains astronauts in the United States. And when she became the head of that center, her decision was that she wanted to make the center more innovative and more inclusive. Now, you'd be thinking, how did she do that? Well, she knew, because of her trajectory, that if you wanted to make an organization really more inclusive, it wouldn't be enough to just promote one or two token people, right, of marginalized categories. She also knew that it wouldn't be enough to organize one-off diversity trainings. She knew that she had to implement deeper cultural changes, that she had to shift the distribution of power in the organization. How did she do that? She created a council in charge of inclusion and innovation. And she asked that council to basically analyze all the formal and informal processes and systems in the organization to better understand how resources were allocated. And once they understood how they were allocated, they took action to actually correct the imbalances and make sure that people who used to not have access to resources would have access to these resources. Let me give you a very specific example of what she did. When it came to informal opportunities, she created a program called the Transparent Opportunity Program, TOP, that was all about identifying all the informal opportunities, looking at the patterns of how they were allocated before, and reallocating them in a fairer way across all employees. One example is very often you have quite well-known people from across the world, and Americans as well, coming to the Johnson Space Center. So let's imagine Michelle Obama was coming for a visit, then someone would have to decide who would give a tour to Michelle Obama. Before Helen Ochoa became the leader of this organization, people knew that there were a handful of people who knew how to give these tours very well. So they were the go-to people. So these people were the ones who were able to develop connections and relationships with all these well-known, powerful people who came to the center. After she implemented the change, what happened was that it was now decided that these opportunities for tours would now be much more fairly distributed, that everyone would have a chance to give a tour, and that everyone would understand that they could raise their hands if they felt that someone was coming who they really wanted to meet or who could really help on a project that they were working on. So that's the kind of intervention that we need to implement if we want to operate the shift to sustainability and to power sharing in organizations and in companies. And yes, I've seen it work. When people do it together and make it an objective, the changes happen. But what Helen Ochoa did is that she changed how people were compensated. She made sure that that top program on transparency and informal opportunities and that inclusion and innovation more generally were now part of how people were assessed and compensated in the company. So if you want to make the changes happen, if you want companies to become sustainable, ultimately, we are going to need to change how we hold people accountable. We should hold them accountable not only for financial, but also for their social and environmental performance. And we should compensate them accordingly, because if we don't, we're sending contradictory signals, pretending that we care, but in the reality, not caring yet. And that's the problem at the moment. So we need to make the processes and systems changing corporations, and the governments across the world need to also change the way we evaluate companies and how we hold them accountable. If we track social and environmental impact in addition to financial performance, then at some point we'll be able to change the taxation system for corporations. And at that point, it could be that the ones that do well financially, but poorly socially and environmentally, would pay more taxes, and that the others would actually be rewarded for the great work they do, not only financially, but also socially and environmentally.
Okay, thank you, Professor Julie. Now we have another the other keynote speaker, yeah, because we do not have a lot of time. Actually, there are still many questions to Professor Julie. Yeah?
So yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jacinto. And I see all the questions. I'm very excited. I'm sorry I have to leave now because I have to go teach a class, but it was an honor to meet everyone and be with you all. And you can obviously also follow up by emails if you have other questions. But thank you for the engagement. Thank you for the invitation. A pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Julie. Okay.
Have a wonderful time with
yes.
Adriana. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie.
All right. Now we move to the other keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please let me introduce our second keynote speaker, Professor Adriana Berlia Puyu. Yeah, I hope I'm not mistaken, yeah, to spell your name. All right. Adriana Puyu Berlia is a professor of management at the University of Craiova, Romania. She is teaching and doing research in human resources management, project management, social audit, corporate social responsibility, and negotiation techniques. She's also teaching and doing research in ethics issues in internet communication, corporate reputation management, cross-cultural management, human resources management, intercultural management at BM Bordeaux's Management School, University of Corsica, Saint Etienne School of Management, Vytautas Magnus University, Kaunas, Lithuania, and University of Economics in Katowice, yeah, Poland. Professor Adriana is Romanian ambassador for ARGH, Association Francophone de Gestion des Ressources Humaines. She is also the member of the Académie des Sciences du Management de Paris. She is the member of the Scientific Council of the University Agency of the Francophone, Vice President of Ethics Commission of the University of Craiova, and member of the Directors Board of Doctoral School of the University of Craiova. This year, Professor Adriana is awarded as the Best Reviewer MDPI Publisher. Congratulations, Professor Adriana. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Professor Adriana Berlia Puyu from University of Craiova, Romania. Professor Adriana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am so glad to be here, and I want to present you, after my colleague Julie present you something about power, I will present you the impact of one moment, because I have some problem with my presentation. I don't know what it's happened. I will stop share and I will, okay, now it's very good, because something it's not so was not so well. Okay, do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, but I think it's some problem with my presentation, because when I share, it's not, I cannot see you and the participant. Edwin, can you share my presentation from your side? It is possible?
Mr. Santo, do you have?
Okay, now it's good. Now it's very good. Okay. After Julie present you some details about power for all, what means power for ordinary people, what means power for executive, for managers, I will present you another part of power, the impact of the pandemic coronavirus on education. Because power is very strongly related with education, and for this reason, we cannot neglect the role of the education in our life. And for this reason, I have some research question, free reflection questions that are very important to ask everyone every day in our life. One question: how dispersal of information and digital technology co-evolve during new challenges? This is related also with power, because dispersal of information give us the opportunity to have many answers, but we don't know what answer is very good for us. How we choose and how we make the good decision. The second question: how does the dispersal of information moderate the decision-making process concerning the relationship between digital technology and education? It's very important, the relationship between digital technology and education, because in the last 2 years, all of us, we use digital technology for our education, at university, at school, for our children, at homework. And for this reason, dispersal of information is in relationship with these two elements, digital technology and education. And the third that I consider more important, how do the new challenges affect the relationship between the dispersal of information and promoting digital technology in education? For this reason, I present you the relationship between dispersal of information, digital technology, and education. And we see that between education, that is in red, and dispersal of information, we have ethical dilemmas. What means? I am an educated people. We work in education, or I'm a PhD student or students, and sometimes dispersal of information arise us many ethical dilemmas. What is good, what is right, what is fake news, or something else. Between education and digital technology, we have legitimacy and trust, because sometimes we don't have trust in digital technology, and because digital technology and dispersal of information are related by risk of failure or error. For this reason, I present you some graphics related to a level of remote working during the pandemic crisis. And we will see that the less people are working in education and health services. And for this reason, it's a floor for improving these elements and digital technology. Because we cannot do health by digitalization or distancing. And also the educational process, it's not so good qualitative related by e-learning system. Here we have the definition of dispersal of information. And I want to underline that dispersal of information is a complex phenomenon that acts on many different levels of influence, for example, economic, social, legal, and either it provides, and that is very important, provides irresponsible organization and also people, a researcher, with tool for, that it's very important, illegal and unethical research, or it leads to the failure of the education process in its various stages. You see, this definition I give for first time in 2006, when I present these elements about dispersal of responsibilities to European Union that with the occasion of the conference. Because the particularity of dispersal of information are these two elements, irresponsible organization and peoples, and illegal and unethical research. Dispersal of information also act differently at the level of doctoral students in education and at the level of professor. For this reason, professors are more able to see what is happening with this dispersal of information, but sometimes doctoral students use this dispersal of information for plagiarism or for cheating in their research. Here we have some sources of dispersal of information. First of all, we have preferential interpretation and application of some part of many pieces of the research process that apparently have the same meaning. For example, in legislation, we take only what we want, or in research articles, we took some parts of the articles and we interpret in our way. Also, internet is the other source. And plethora of tools for education, many platforms, many journals, many books. And for this reason, we can jump between one another, but also for an ethical purpose. 7, normative answers that provoke crisis and chaos in our real life. We have competition, social justice, technology, quality of our life that is very important, and not finally sustainable development. We have some principle of education in our new real life. Sustainability. Our space, it's new space because we work at home. We created our own space at home. We are not able to interact with our colleagues, with our students, with the other people because COVID-19 is present. And for this reason, this space is easily reallocated and reconfigured. Our cost is so low, and the future is related to this space. The other element is engagement. Our engagement become low and lower because community, professional, and expert engagement is low because we cannot interact face to face. On distance, it is very difficult to see what is happening with the other. No element to inspire learners and tutors. No deeper learning and deeper ideas. Also, we have collaboration. Collaboration is very difficult at the distancial. When we have some important things to do, we prefer to be near and to work together like a team, as a team, and to support cooperative learning. We have security. Our security, key to digital technology used in education, is also under question. Why? Because sometimes on distancial is very difficult to prove the security of the tool. The other part is dispersal of information related to pandemic crisis. And for this reason, we have many levels. Professor attitude toward risk that we are, organization, ambiguity between different actors at individual levels, and also contradictory sources of information. For example, when we see on TV some information related to vaccine, or the same information we will see and we will hear in the other mass media, for example, journals, this information are sometimes contradictory. Medicine or the other people promote the vaccination process, but the other tell us to pay attention to this procedure. And for this reason, dispersal of information sometimes is not a very good phenomena. And for this reason for failure of strategy in our real life. Why we failure? Because lack of knowledge, that it's in red, and it's a more important reason. Lack of knowledge of existing guidelines and recommendations in education. And not only in education, we can expand this lack of knowledge to our entire life. This pandemic took us by surprise because no one underlines the effects of this COVID. Also, what is very important and is related to Julie books, the leadership attitude. Leadership attitude is different in different parts of the world. It's different at different level in the organization. And fourth, level of decisional experience of person involved in the fight with this invisible enemy. Why? Because the decision is made at national level, first of all, and second, it's to the other level. We continue the other four reasons. We have all, and I think around the world, we have inadequate procedure related to the outcome. Why? Because we don't know what is happened tomorrow. We don't know the evolution of this COVID-19. We have also failure to follow the ethical norms about using the technology in pandemic crisis. Some people follow the ethical norms. Some people try to avoid to follow these ethical norms because it's very easy to try to avoid this ethical norm than to follow. Technical and human failure due to an inadequate understanding of the decision-making process. Sometimes we don't understand what has happened with us, what has happened with our government, what has happened with our policemen. And the last is the culture, but not the least, the culture within the team. That is very important. We have two artificial barriers. One, dispersal of information that acts in the purpose of ethical norms and regulation. That is very important. A second, we have the relationship between transparency, trust, risk, and output. That means governance in education. Both elements, both artificial barriers are very important. You cannot arise one without arise the other. That is very important. We continue with interaction between stay-at-home COVID-19 crisis and university governance. We see that university is in the middle of the war because on the part it's COVID-19 crisis, on the other part are our students and professors that want to be present at school and to give and to deliver lecture in face-to-face system. I continue with two recommendations. We need to increase relationship between transparency, trust, risk, and ethical output, and to see what is happened with this phenomena of dispersal of information. And on the other part, to be promoter of social justice and sustainable development as first and important principle in our real life. The two elements, relationship between our ethical principle and promoting ethical principle in our real life are very important for development of our life. In conclusion, we need to see that very important, it's the different level of the aversion of the risk of the people in the light of new challenges, because people take risk differently. Some people take risks and avoid vaccination. The other people take risks and make vaccine. And on the other part, the impact of the dispersal of information on education by using digital technology. And I think using digital technology will raise many challenges for education, because dispersal of information will be increases. And also dispersal of information affects the current international education landscape, because many universities from many countries are confused and cannot avoid to eliminate this effect of pandemic crisis generated by COVID-19. Also, in conclusion, we have three elements: dispersal of information, that means illegal and unethical; education, and due to dispersal of information, we have waste of knowledge; and also digital technologies that relay and increase the effect of crisis. Thank you very much for your attention. I go very quickly because in a few minutes here in this place will be the ambassadress of the France, and my time is very limited due to this very important visit in my university. And for this reason, I'm already available for all your questions. I want to pray Edwin to send you my presentation. You have my email, and I want to invite you to see my presentation, and every reasons can be the departure point of your research for an articles, a chapter of the books, or a PhD thesis chapter, because already I made some research with colleagues from around the world, and I want to continue to work with the other people in this domain. I'm ready for your question, and I want to tell you very sincerely that if Lady Ambassador will be here, I want to stop for a few minutes to give her good afternoon. But until then, I'm at your disposal for question.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Adriana. There is a question here in the chat from Idri Asmuni.
Yeah.
What are the
critical success factors to make dispersal of information? Yes. In the other presentation, in the next future, I will present you the success factor. First of all, we have to make difference between our life, our workplace, and national legislation. First of all, we have to see what we want from our life and from our managers. And one critical success factor is education. If we are educate people, we can make the difference between fake news and real news. Second, about education, it's our ethical principle. We need to have clearly some ethical principle. 1, 2, 3 doesn't matter, but this ethical principle should be very clear for us. If we don't have for us ethical principle, we cannot avoid to use the dispersal of information as an ethical tools. The other question,
yes,
because
from Gugus,
sustainability is a part of education process to establish for future. However, pandemic gives a new problem for this. Could you give detail why to solve it? One way to solve it is also to help our one moment. Excuse me, because I thought this madam is here. Is to help our governor, our managers to follow the rules. First of all, we need to follow the rules. Second, to help the other to follow the rules. I know that it's very difficult to follow the rules in the pandemic crisis because some rules are contradictory with our life or something with our religion, with our friends. And for this reason, it's very difficult to follow the rules. When we cannot follow the rules, we have to pay attention, don't break these rules. And for this reason, during pandemic crisis, it's a huge opportunity to spread dispersal of information, to develop some unethical or illegal behavior. If you see that on internet, you will see that around the world are some scandals related to vaccination, with medical problems, with politicians, with corruption. And for this reason, pandemic crisis, it's a huge opportunity to manifest dispersal of information, to give power to the people with unethical behavior. And these people that have an unethical behavior use these unethical elements to subminate these ordinary people like us. If pandemic not managed, what we must do for solve education? Pandemic can be managed because already we prove that we can keep under control some elements. But for solve the educational problems, we have to have a very, very strong relationship with our students and colleagues. The communication process needs to be very, very strong in nowadays than before, because we have to be in permanent contact and to solve the problem just when the problem arrives. Because the problem that arrive in pandemic, if they are not solved in the moment that they rise, will be difficult to solve after. Okay, 1 minute break. Sorry for 2 minutes, and I will be back.
Yes, we are having break time around 2 minutes. Please enjoy the coffee and the tea around you. Oh yeah, for the participant who would like to ask questions, please write your questions in the chat room. Yeah. Okay, while waiting for Professor Adriana, there is information that next month we will have workshop, and also in December we will have conference. Please get ready to join us again for future conferences hosted by Postgraduate School, University of Bandar Lampung. And there is another information that for those who would like to join our postgraduate school, in January, we open the registration for new students. Yeah, and the link for the attendance will be shared by the committee soon.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I already shared the attendance list. Please don't forget to fill the attendance list, because if you would like to get the certificate, you should fill the attendance list. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to inform that please open the chat box on the Zoom meeting and please fill the attendance list, because if you would like to get the certificate, you should fill in the attendance list. I already shared the form. Thank you.
Okay. I am sorry. I remain speaking in French, but I will switch in English. I'm already here.
Okay, thank
And,
you, Professor Adriana. Please continue. Are you ready?
Already I finished. This day was a very busy day of my life. And I want to ask to the second question,
Yes,
the question from Rico.
Yes.
The global lockdown of education institution is going to cause major interruption in students' learning and disruption in internal assessment. Very true. What can be done to mitigate this negative impact? Oh, it's very difficult to say, because I don't know if we can undercover the period lost in education.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because of technical problem, yeah, with Professor Adriana. We should wait for a moment. Okay, participant, we are waiting for another 5 minutes to have technical problem solved from Professor Adriana. Okay, we get news from Professor Adriana. We would like to say sorry that the problem is not solved for the technical problem having like Professor Adriana. So please, MC Alvita, take over the Zoom meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for Mr. Susanto as the moderator, and thank you so much for all the materials provided by our astonishing speakers. Hopefully all of us can take the knowledge as many as possibly by joining this conference. On behalf of the committee, I'm Alvita Harahap, and I would like to extend our appreciation to each and every one of you for attending this event. See you on the 5th International Conference. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Before we end this meeting, we would like to take a picture. So for all the participants, please turn on your camera. Okay. Mr. Iwan will take the picture. So please turn on the camera, please.
Okay, thank you, Alvita. I will take some picture. Please turn on the camera.
And don't forget to smile.
Yeah, we have 5 slides. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, the first slide. Okay, the second slide. Oh. Okay, the fourth slide. Okay, and the last. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for all the participants. Okay, maybe I would like to give Mr. Edwin for the meeting. Okay.
Okay, thank you everyone. See you later on the next conference.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much all for all participants and speakers. Thank you so much, Mr. Andala.
Thank you so much, Alvita, Mr. Santo, Mr. Iwan, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Taran.